Of a song. Let's see. Sing the wondrous love of Jesus, sing his mercy and his grace. In the mansions bright and blessed, he'll prepare for us a place. When we all head to heaven, what a day of rejoicing that will be. When we all see Jesus, we'll sing and shout the victory. Amen. Let's pray. Abba, Father, thank you so much for getting us here. Thank you for the changing of the seasons, and we're glad that you have your eye on the world. Thank you so much for your word. Please help us as we approach it tonight. Please be with all the people who cannot be here tonight but want to be. And please bless this congregation and bless our elders and lead them in such a way that they can shepherd us well. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so tonight, as we move forward in a roughly chronological pattern through the Bronze Age documents of the Bible, we are passing beyond the lifetime of Moses now. At the start of this transition, Joshua took over as Yahweh's appointed leader for the Israelites. And as we come to the events of the books of Joshua and Judges, we are at the very end of the Bronze Age period. Before the period of the Judges is even over, the Bronze Age is over. And we are in the archaeological Iron Age. This academic transition, Bronze Age, Iron Age, it marks not a biblical moment, but it marks the historical change when the Egyptian and Hittite economies collapsed. And that allowed for bigger political and economic opportunities for smaller groups like the Philistines, the Phoenicians, the Israelites, and other ethnic groups. We know that the Israelites, for their part, ended up participating in these changing times by demanding a king. That was one of their big changes. But that's another class. That's Iron Age Bible, which is like all the rest of the Old Testament. So we can never do that. That'd be a huge class. But the first thing I want to do tonight is acknowledge an artifact that does kind of straddle the Bronze Age, Iron Age line. This is not a terribly recent discovery. It is 3 years ago now. But I want you to know about it because it will come back into the news soon. And I was asked to cover it in particular in class, and it is a controversial discovery. And I just don't want you to get sucked into the popular black hole of people saying really mean things about the Bible or bad apologetics. Neither of those is enjoyable. So, in Joshua 8, verses 30 through 35, Joshua 8, verses 30 through 35, Joshua is doing something that Moses told them to do. When they got across the Jordan, they were supposed to build an altar of a sacrificial altar of unhewn field stones. Don't pick up the stones from around, and don't knock them into any particular shape or anything like that. Just fit them into an altar as they are. He was also supposed to inscribe the law on another set of stones, and there was supposed to be an oral recitation of the law, including a recitation of blessings and curses, stipulated for either keeping the law or failing to keep it. And all of that is covered between the locations of the foot of Mount Gerizim and the foot of Mount Ebal. and we do know where those are. They're in the West Bank now, Samaria, Shechem, area. But all these verses have a resonance with the instructions given in Deuteronomy 27 by Moses, and here in Joshua 8 you have Joshua carrying out his instructions. So far on Mount Ebal there is a two-phase altar so far that primarily dates to the early Iron Age, after Joshua. But it is a well-established fact in ancient Near Eastern archaeology that sites with a significant religious heritage could end up hosting multiple phases of religious architecture. So in other words, if a spot was religiously important enough to people, Canaanites, Israelites, whoever the people were, if a spot was religiously important enough to people, they might keep building something religious there, even if it meant tearing down something old and building something new. They would keep using that spot. The altar, while still deserving of research, however, is not the controversial artifact. Altar's been there for a while. The controversial artifact is a lead tablet. It is inscribed on one side, it might be inscribed on both sides, and it is folded shut like a wallet. They made it and they inscribed into it, and then they heated it up again and they folded it shut. And this was a thing that they did. That is not unique. First, we'll get to the inscription, but first the tablet as a whole. The tablet, again, is made of lead. That lead was imported from Laurian, Greece, which operated mines during the second phase of the late Bronze Age. This kind of import is not unique. That's also not the special thing. One of the reasons Egypt had interests in Canaan, because we talked about Egypt and Canaan in the Bronze Age, one of the reasons that Egypt had interests in Canaan before its own economic collapse at the end of the Bronze Age was partaking of that coastline market of Aegean and Cypriot imports that would come into the Canaanites' land. Metal was one of those imports. Lead was one of those imports. On site, however, the tablet was not found in a good context. When you find something in a good context, because archaeologists know that when you move down in the dirt, you're generally moving down in time. The newer stuff is on top, the older stuff is on the bottom. And we want things to be in place so that we can correlate finds all on this level together, temporarily. This tablet was not found in a good time-indicating context. It was discovered by the same research team that works on the altar, but not having permission in 2019 to do work on the altar, that project decided to spend some time sifting through piles of dirt that had actually been removed from around the altar, above and beside it, back in the 1980s. And that pile of dirt had been there for a long time. Archaeologists do not just throw their dirt willy-nilly once we remove it. We like to keep it together in big piles. We might push it down the end of a hill, but it will be a very specific side of the hill. And so you can find a lot in the dump, but you never know which part of the dirt it came from before you moved it. So that's the problem. One of the artifacts that was found was this folded, inscribed lead tablet. And since using digital scanning to check for an inscription on the folded interior, the team has said that there are 48 alphabetic letters on the inside of the tablet, and they composed a suggested reading. This is where it gets controversial. At this stage, the professional thing to do is publish your data in a journal for your academic peers and allow access to the material so you can all start talking about it together. You can discuss things, you can repeat lab stuff, you can be agreed with by some, you can be disagreed with by others, but that conversation starts. And at that same time, you do a press release, in no small part, because you want people to give your project money so that you can keep doing more work with what you found. But the public and the academics are ideally going to find out about this at around the same time. However, it seems to have been claimed on Facebook that competing researchers were actually planning to steal the tablet and publish it under their name, and so the research team that found the tablet decided to go ahead and do a press release. Literally, it's been 3 years now, and still no other academic team has been able to look at the material. So they went ahead and they did a press release, and they've been very vocal about what they found. But meanwhile, everybody that has a PhD in archaeology and epigraphy has been saying, well, why don't you show it to us? And that has caused a lot of bad blood. But in the press conference, which was held in March of this year, they presented the translation, "Cursed, cursed, cursed, cursed by the God Yahweh, you will die cursed, cursed you will surely die, cursed by Yahweh, cursed, cursed, cursed." And that is their suggestion for the inside of the lead tablet. As of this past August, just a couple months ago, the lead researcher announced via YouTube that there were 2 50-page peer-reviewable articles in the works. So those will probably come out soon, and you'll hear all about it again. As of now, the translation that I just read you could be suitable, but again, it's only been accessible to one team. And it would be kind of irresponsible just to celebrate as if we found another inscription with Yahweh's name on it. And make no mistake, the biggest significance is not that it has Yahweh's name outside of the Bible. We have actually had many instances of that already. I don't want you to be under the impression that if it turns out to be a verb instead of God's name, that Jesus is not Lord. This is not the case. This is not the case. Jesus is Lord, regardless of the Mount Ebal curse tablet inscription. But Yahvism has been reasonably established in academic archaeology for many years. We have multiple inscriptions mentioning Yahweh. The significance of this one would be that it is now the earliest. And that's what would make it special. It would move back the appearance of Yahweh outside of the Bible, and it would tell us a little more about the historical reality of curses in the Bronze Age or the Iron Age, and it's another association of cursing with the location where cursing was an important ceremony in the Bible. So the historical picture might be Joshua and the Israelites show up. They have this interactive double mountain blessing, cursing, recitation of the law. And then that becomes a place where people keep going to dwell on and sacrifice for the gift of the law, and thinking about the cursing and the blessing that Joshua and their parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents undertook there. So that's the significance of the tablet. It might say Yahweh, it might not. We'll find out. I think everybody's pretty certain that it says curse. But reading ancient languages is hard. Reading hand-inscribed ancient languages is harder. So just be patient. And there you go. Next, I want to talk about something that if you just read the book of Joshua as a whole, the book of Judges, the book of Deuteronomy, this is one of seemingly the most difficult realities for Bible readers today, and that is the destruction. In the Bible, when Joshua and the Israelites enter Canaan, and if you read carefully, before they enter Canaan, before they cross the Jordan, lots of people die. Most of them are not Israelite. And this has been regarded with a bit of concern, to say the least, over the course of modern biblical study. I don't want to offer this tonight as a conclusion, but I am hoping that it will function as additional information. Our impression of how God values our lives, our choices, and our opportunities does not have to come down to a single one-sided discussion with me. But many people who have focused on the New Testament to the detriment of their understanding of the Old have taken great issue with the measure of physical destruction the Israelites were allowed to cause in Canaan towards the end of the Exodus. These actions have been framed as evidence of God being evil, of God being different now than he used to be. I have heard that said here, that God was not the same in the Old Testament as he is in the New Testament. I have heard it said here. He's just different. He's completely different. I would like to suggest to you a little more Bronze Age perspective on this issue of early ancient Israelite war doctrine. War is not an ideal that Yahweh gave the Israelites by themselves to impose upon an unsuspecting and peaceful Canaanite world. This is not like in the Avengers where you see Thanos, and I've just lost like half of you here, but this is not like in some superhero movie where the evil guy just comes to the pretty little world with flowers all over the place. This is my hand flower. I hope you like it. It's horrible. And he just decimates everything, and they had no idea what was coming. That's not what happened. That is not the Bronze Age world. It is not an alien utopia with pretty flowers and happy people. There is no such thing, for example, as a holy war in the Bronze Age. Destruction, combat, and causing death have always been human political languages, even up to today. But in the Bronze Age, warfare was always primarily a divine matter. There's no such thing as a holy war because all war involves the movement and support of the gods, period. A great many number of ancient Near Eastern deities were normally depicted in sculpture and in literature in some sort of battle stance because people are ready to throw down. People are ready to fight. And you have civic politics revolving around a theology of divine politics. The Bronze Age understanding of such things revolved around ideas of peace or unrest within a given deity's territory. Okay? Either things were at peace with the gods, or somebody was causing unrest. And then a deity's sovereignty becomes an issue. The deity empowers his chosen king, and he fights before him or beside him to fix the issue. If a deity's people were not what they should be, they invited war. Of course, there was also complaint and there was diplomacy. These are not just warmongers, but they're ready to fight. And sources of continual unrest are not just given a light slap on the hand. They are put down. While details are not specified, the Bronze Age biblical documents repeatedly imply that Yahweh's interactions were not limited to the patriarchs and the Israelites. Okay? God's interactions with the Bronze Age world were not limited to the patriarchs and the Israelites. Based on the very text of Abram's life, by itself, Yahweh had some kind of relationship with an Egyptian pharaoh in its middle kingdom that he could have a conversation with about. You should not, that is not his sister. You need to give her back. God has a communicable relationship with this person. Same for Abimelech, king of Gerar in the Negev, and Melchizedek in the Canaanite hill country. Melchizedek. God did not destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of Lot. Lot just happened to be living there at the time when God intervened in the area. Yahweh even specifically told Abraham that one of the reasons his descendants would have to wait to inherit the land where he had been sojourning was, quote, because the guilt of the Amorite is not yet complete. The guilt of the Amorite is not yet complete. In other words, he said about the Amorites to Abraham, your descendants are going to have to wait on this land because the Amorites don't deserve to be kicked out yet. In other words, it's also the same in Deuteronomy 9:4. Deuteronomy 9:4. I think I can find the book of Deuteronomy tonight. Should be the last one. There we go. Deuteronomy 9:4. Do not think to yourself after Yahweh your God has driven them out before you because of my own righteousness. Yahweh has brought me here to possess this land. It is because of the wickedness of these nations that Yahweh is driving them out ahead of you. It is, verse 5, it is not because of your righteousness or even your inner uprightness. In other words, it doesn't matter how you appear to be obedient to the law, and it doesn't matter how good a heart you actually have, that you have come here to possess their land. Instead, because of the wickedness of these nations, Yahweh your God is driving them out ahead of you in order to confirm the promise he made on oath to your ancestors, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I suggest to you, based on the text, that Yahweh both communicated with multiple Bronze Age groups and paired his knowledge of them with literally centuries of patience. It might just be a few pages. It might be an hour's worth of reading for us to go from Abraham to, well, no, you won't get from Genesis to Deuteronomy in an hour. But give it a good week and you'll be there. But we're not talking about weeks of patience for the Amorites and the Canaanites and all of them. We are talking about the entire scope of the patriarchal lives, plus all the time that the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt, and the wilderness wandering. They had all that time. And God was literally, clearly paying attention the whole time. When those kingdoms had their chance, he entrusted the Israelites with the ban. Okay, this is what it's called in Deuteronomy Chapter 9, I lost my verse. Hold on just a second, and let me find it again. I may not be able to find it again, and that would make me feel really sad. But, no, I will not. I wrote my verses down in a bad place, and now it's disappeared because technology is horrible sometimes. But the ban is a term. I'll be able to correct this with our next class. Corrections time is so valuable. The ban is a term used in Deuteronomy mostly and in Joshua that may sometimes be translated as the ban in your Bibles. You must not touch anything that has come under the ban. The city is coming under the ban. Or it might say devoted to destruction at various points in your Old Testament. The idea is you can't have it because God has claimed it for judgment. And this is the idea of the ban. And it is not unique to Israel, okay? This terminology that is sprinkled across the Old Testament represents Yahweh's version of a military doctrine. And it is the reason behind the destruction of the territory of Heshbon and Bashan in Deuteronomy 2, although the phrase is not used there, the logic is there, and Jericho, Ai, and other places that Joshua got to before, according to near the end of Joshua, he was too old to do anymore. This military doctrine, again, was not unique to the Israelites, like most other things that God gave the Israelites to do in the Bronze Age. It's a version. It's an Israelite version. It's a Yahweh version of it, but it's not unique. We have Hittite texts describing the ceremonial rejection of certain towns by destroying them. And while our biblical texts, Deuteronomy, Joshua, while they're a good deal earlier, Yahweh eventually allowed a later ruler of Moab named Mesha to operate on the same doctrine against Israel. The Meshistel, lines 14 through 18, reads, "And Chemosh," which was a Moabite god in the Iron Age, "and Chemosh said to me, Go take Nebo against Israel. And I went in the night, and I fought against it from the break of day till noon, and I took it. And I killed all 7,000 men, women, and maidens, for I devoted them to Ashtar Chemosh. And I took from it the vessels of Yahweh and offered them before Chemosh." In other words, Israel did this to people, and God used people to do it to Israel. This is Bronze Age military doctrine. The ban did not facilitate conversion. This is not the convert or die situation. It was not about killing off non-believers. The infidel is not on the table here. This was not ethnic cleansing. It's not, oh, I'm an Israelite, you're a Canaanite, you have to die. This ancient Near Eastern military doctrine was site-specific. This city needs to go. This city and its villages have to go. It was site-specific, and it was used for 3 reasons: to create examples, to establish particular leaders, and to put down unrest in the name of a given deity. In the case of Yahweh's perspective on Canaan that he shares with Abraham and Moses, centuries of unrest, when he has just been watching it get worse. But clearly, he's been talking to people. Melchizedek was a fantastic guy. And yet, Melchizedek is not enough to save Canaan, Bronze Age Canaan. And Lot is not enough to save Sodom. The biblical reasoning is not that what the Israelites believed or how they were told to live entitled them to violence against others. That is not the case. Yahwism was not their license to kill. These are not ancient Israeli James Bonds, okay? Violence is ultimately not a virtue with which humans can faithfully represent God. This is why David, a career warrior in Yahweh's name, was prevented from building the first temple rather than being privileged to do it. But it is God's own right to weigh life and society against sin, faith, and covenant. That is God's own right. And the ban, as Yahweh employed it through the ancient Israelites, was a matter of God's timing, dealing with multiple nations at the same time, and not ethnic or religious privilege. That's not what it was about, since again, God would settle the Israelites' own unrest in the same or similar fashion. The ban was Yahweh's resolution against the unrest of the people of his territory, and his territory is wherever he says it is. He is not limited. And that included all of Canaan, all of Egypt, all of Mesopotamia back in the Tower of Babel. It was also a means to secure possession of the territory that God had promised Abraham his descendants would have. He was not particularly pleased with those descendants, but he was quite fond of Abraham, and it was worth keeping the promise. And after that, of course, he had made a new covenant with the Israelites. It would be up to them to keep their promise, blessings or curses. At the same time, the impact of the unrest that the Amorites and the Canaanites had already been sowing for generations was now no longer tolerable. And they were handled in the Bronze Age way. They were devoted to destruction. Does that make sense? A little bit? It's not genocide or something like that. That's an inaccurate portrayal. The last thing I want to do is say a little about Jericho. And I have not lost all of my verse references for this part. So here we go. Finding the specific settlement that hosted Rahab and her family has caused a lot of hurt feelings in scholarship. If any of you went over to Jericho when you took the Israel trip, there are going to be 10 people there that will be happy to tell you about the story in the Bible and then try to sell you something, and there will be 10 more people who will be happy to tell you that the Bible is just full of bold-faced lies about what happened at Jericho. Okay? People feel very strongly about this. Finding the specific settlement is an ongoing matter of archaeological debate. The debate was originally driven by different field methodologies. One person read the site this way, another person read the site this way. Their way said the Israelites were here. Their way said the Israelites could not be here. And that, plus a deep, century-plus-long philosophical divide in scholarship, has manifested dramatically bitter attempts to either prove or disprove the historical accuracy of the Bible as a whole. As it stands, it can be reasonably agreed now that the prime excavation site of Jericho is a bit of a mess, okay? It was never done entirely well, not to mention the religious or anti-religious politics of the early 1900s. So as far as archaeological sites are concerned, the truth is Jericho is not in a good shape anymore to give us the type of answers that we would most like to have from it, if it ever was. Readers may also personally suffer from what I personally call Atlanta syndrome. I grew up in Atlanta, and so any time in the Bible that I would read about a city, I would think about Metro Atlanta. This is a wildly deceptive mental practice. When you read about cities in the Bible from the time of Jesus to the late Bronze Age, you need to be thinking about hundreds and thousands instead of millions. You need to be thinking about cities in terms of acres instead of miles. You need to be thinking about a bunch of people that may live in tents around a smaller group of permanent structures and not skyscrapers. Although, they were starting to build skyscrapers in the early Roman period, like multi-story apartment buildings, and that's kind of cool. But that's way after this. So you need to be thinking about architectural situations that may not always leave the biggest, baddest footprint in the dirt. And yet, you can still be talking about a lot of people. The biblical text itself allows for a couple of historical possibilities, and my hope is that in sharing this with you, when next time you read your favorite story from the book of Joshua, if it happens to be Jericho, you can have a bit more of a mental image that is not so Nashville-sized. And we'll just have to see which option will end up being most archaeologically likely, but now Jericho is a national park, and that means that archaeological progress is severely restricted because people are expected to walk there now and show up, and there are signs posted all over the place, and they want to keep those things intact that have signs. So first, Rahab may have lived in an actual town. The word in Hebrew is Ir, okay? It sounds like the thing on the side of your head, but it has multiple meanings. One of those is that she lived in an actual town. In this case, with Jericho as a proper town, we would understand the Hebrew word Ir, like in Joshua 6:3, to refer to a city-state. Joshua 6:3, it's not a big thing, it has the word. Joshua 6:3 says, in English, have all the warriors march around the Ir one time. Do this for 6 days. So this Ir could have been a city-state. Next, Rahab could have lived in a defensive settlement that would kind of function like a fortress, which would have defended a range of unwalled villages and operated as a seat of local authority. So you can have like an actual little town with a king, in which case there might have been a palace, something like that, or you can have more like a fortress that guards all the farmland and the little hills and that kind of thing. There's not a lot of farmland. Jericho is an oasis, free with your tuition. But that said, we have this usage in the most famous city in the Bible, Jerusalem. You will recall that Jerusalem contained the city of David. They are not the same when you're reading the Iron Age Bible. Eventually, all of Jerusalem is called the city of David, but in the beginning, when they first take the city from the Jebusites, there is a city within the city. How many of you know about the Forbidden City in China? Okay, a handful of you. Today, you can Google Forbidden City, Beijing, and what it will take you to is a massive compound where the Emperor of China used to live. It is called the Forbidden City. In the footprint of Beijing, it is centered but much smaller. But it is called a city. We use it in English today with the same flexibility that they used it in Hebrew then. A city can refer to a specially defended position, like a fortress, a fort, that kind of thing. It just depends on what was really sitting there on the dirt. So a local madam using her house as an inn would have been comfortable in either of these scenarios. Jericho could have been a little fort that looked over the oasis, or we could be talking about the actual city-state that we have found in excavation. Lastly, Rahab's house would have been part of a late bronze structure, okay? And we'll talk about this. There was a defensive innovation that was undertaken by Canaanites in the late bronze, and we're going to try to sort out if this is what Rahab had. Ultimately, the back of her house may have formed a wall. Many more towns were walled in the days of Abraham than in the days of Joshua. there was a change over the centuries. And there has been archaeological debate about whether late Bronze Jericho, the Jericho that would have been come upon by Joshua, still had a wall. The Bible says there was one, so for many of us that is a non-issue. But archaeologically, when you have a text saying something is there and you have dirt saying something is not, it is a question or a conflict. Archaeology by itself, however, would also indicate that Megiddo did not have a wall in the Bronze Age. Megiddo was a city much farther up in Canaan. That also a lot happens there in the Bible. But archaeologists did not find its late Bronze Age wall. However, Egyptian documents talking about Megiddo at the time said that it had one. So, walls did not have to survive for us to find, for them to have been there. Mud brick could melt. Stones could be taken away and reused. And let me tell you, reuse is a big factor. Ancient people and even less industrialized modern people do not let good stone go to waste. You leave a pile of stone, they are going to come and that is going to end up in their houses a quarter mile away, I guarantee you. We have found some of the finest Roman inscriptions in people's living room walls, a mile away from where they're supposed to be. So walls get dismantled, mud brick walls melt, walls don't have to stay. But Joshua 2:15, if you want to look at Joshua 2:15, cannot turn my page, there we go. Joshua 2:15, then Rahab let down a rope. Then Rahab let them down by a rope through the window. Her house was built in, and this is straight from the Hebrew, in a wall of the wall, and she lived in the wall. The Hebrew is kind of repetitive, but what is being described here? The phrase that describes Rahab's house is, in a wall of the wall, and she lived in the wall. Now, we should make a Bible class song out of that because that's kind of fun. But we also know from Joshua 15, we just read it, that her house required a rope to exit safely from a window that opened to the exterior of the city or fortress. This suggests, one, a house that is more than 1 story tall, and the house cannot merely be against a wall. Okay, like you have a wall around your city and you just want to build your house against it. All you got to take care of is 3 walls and the roof. That cannot be the case here because she wouldn't have a window to the exterior. Her house has to be contemporary with the construction of the wall, or they had to let her punch a hole in the defenses, which would be weird. But we also know from Joshua chapter 2, verse 6. Joshua chapter 2, verse 6. Now she had taken them up to the roof and had hidden them in the stalks of flax she had spread out on the roof. Her house was not built beneath a wall because she had a usable roof where she could store agricultural products. So it can't just be like a little enclave, a little shelter inside of a pre-existing wall. It has to have an exposed roof. What is likely portrayed here was a development of the late Bronze Age where, lacking the resources or political leeway with your neighbors to get away with building a more significant defensive structure, because let me tell you, when you put up a wall, your neighbor asks, why are you doing that? So, when you didn't have the political leeway or the resources for more substantial defensive structures, the Canaanites would instead build complete rings of houses. The houses would all face inward, windows high up, with the only entry point into the circle being a gate that would have been stuck between somewhere in the ring of houses, between a couple of them. One gate, normally. Sometimes this would involve the rear walls being a little thicker than the front of the house, because everybody's side walls are shared. Everybody's rear walls connect, and the front of your house you just have to yourself, and you have a roof. So perhaps we should understand that Rahab lived in a segment of the wall, is how we could translate that. In a wall of the wall, and she lived in the wall. She lived in a segment of the wall, the apparent design of which would also suggest a certain time period for the construction of her house, namely the late Bronze Age. So you maybe picture that when it's talking about Rahab. She's got a roof, she's got a high window, but her house is just part of a contiguous wall, a circle of homes, and there's just one gate. Any questions? Any questions about the tablet? Any questions about Bronze Age war doctrine? Okay. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Well, this is going back to Jericho.
Jericho.
It probably is bad apologetics. It's something that I think that I remember reading 30 years ago.
Okay.
And that was that there was a completely different village named Jericho that did show some signs of an outward fall.
Okay. Have we found more than one Jericho? The Oasis has continued to provide from time immemorial. However, to my knowledge, we have only found one site of Jericho that would be appropriate to date to the late Bronze Age. However, this is the rule. For the sake of preservation, because archaeology is destruction, archaeologists never dig everything. Ever. Right? That would be irresponsible. We're waiting for the day when we can just show up to hills with big portable x-ray machines and just see inside like Superman. That day has not come. So we don't dig everything. We just dig enough to answer our questions. We've actually scaled down significantly. We used to leave huge trenches. But anyway, to my knowledge, there is not a great contender for the current national park. However, the Hebrew language allows us to postulate that the city might not have been the only defended structure. Because we are having trouble finding walls for the late Bronze City that we have. So, in which case it would have been more of a village, agricultural village. Anything else? Okay. I hope you enjoy your Chick-fil-A. I know I will. Take care. Oh, we will not meet next week. It is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. So enjoy your week off.